From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, alongside the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis as we bring you a new episode for Monday, February 27, 2023. We're almost to March already, folks, in this calendar year. As always, February always goes quick as it's the shortest month, but alas, we are in spring training. We are seeing spring training action, and it is finally time here at Sox Machine for the podcast, and we begin our position previews for the upcoming season. In this episode, we will be previewing the Chicago White Sox outfielder, taking a look at each of the starters, the projected starters, also taking a look at the depth as well for the Chicago White Sox and what this position group, what they need to work on during spring training, and what we're going to be paying attention to early in the season to determine just how successful this unit is at the end of the year. And it has a chance to be a pretty successful unit for the Chicago White Sox. But first, Jim, we have spring training games to talk about, and it was great to have our first watch party of the calendar year with our friends from the 108 on playback for the first spring training game. I know you had to duck out early, but you missed the highlights of the first spring training game. And I can't believe that an infield pop-up dropped like Gordon Beckham all those years ago, running into Addison Reed. And then it happened again in the second game.
Yes.
Like, what is going... That's my biggest takeaway. What is going on with this play?
Yeah, I regret having left early, went to teach curling, so I had to skip out the ninth inning, so I missed it. But then, like, the White Sox thought maybe I did not have MLB TV and couldn't go see a replay, so they did it for me again live, a stirring reenactment of the whole thing. And what struck me is that Jake Burger was the first baseman on both plays. Brian Ramos was the third baseman on both plays. But Jake Burger, like, going back to his escapades at second base, which, I think we can officially close the door on that now that the shift is banned and two infielders have to be on each side. So Jake Burger will not be a second baseman anymore. But like the thing that struck me about Burger watching him when he played in Nashville was like pop-ups gave him problems. And it was like pop-ups going back behind first base in front of the right fielder in that triangle area. Like he struggled with them twice, came up short on them or didn't back up or was afraid of being called off. And now we're seeing the same thing. Like, I don't know if this was a problem for him at third base. And we didn't know, like, I know like Joe Creedy, I remember like he, the talk was that he had some depth perception issues, which prevented him from playing the outfield. So like, it was a case where he had to be a third baseman. And I don't know if that's something I just, vaguely remembered and turns out wasn't a thing. I don't remember that being a problem with him, but just it came up like, once or twice, I think, and it just stuck in my brain. And I don't know if there's any way to check it now because the internet has forgotten some things from that era. But with Burger, like I remember those pop-ups being a problem then like 2 in a row now, like him showing up late to the triangle or actually like the square, because in both cases, like the pitcher wandered into the into the play. Like the pitcher did not get out of the way. The pitcher did not direct traffic, just kind of loped in thinking he might catch it, but was expecting to be called off, but didn't really do anything to make it easier. So yeah, I just remember Jose Abreu's voice being very loud and declarative on such plays. Basically like you'd hear him coming in from, before you saw him, you'd hear him coming in and we did not hear that sound. And I think, that's the first evidence I've seen of Jose Abreu being missed is that play. Perhaps Andrew Vaughn will make it, but unfortunately Jake Burger, who's probably the third stringer, maybe fourth stringer at first base right now, was involved both times and made a mess of it.
Yeah, the first two games, the other takeaway is that overall the defense is not looking good. Now, a lot of the innings have been played by the backups. The problem is, this is the Chicago White Sox, and the backups play more than you really want them to play in the upcoming season. With the injury health, like Jake Marisnick booted a ball in the corner. And that shocked me because that's why he's here. He's here because of his defensive ability. I know mostly at center field, but he booted that ball in the left field corner, and that's disappointing because it's like, my dude, you're 31 years old. If you are a defensive liability in spring training, you better go on Zillow and start looking at apartments in Charlotte. Like, your fate is sealed if you don't improve.
Like Adam Engel in Baltimore.
Exactly. And Carlos Perez, Jim, man, I don't know if he's a catcher. He could be a good hitter. He's shown to be a good hitter in AAA, but I am thinking that Rick Hahn needs to go to the free agent wire and maybe sign some veteran catchers that don't have a job right now, just to make anyone feel better about a third catcher behind Sebi Zavala and Yasmani Grandal. And with Grandal's knees, you know that Perez is going to get some time, or whoever that third catcher is. And again, it's incredibly early. It's just 2 games, but this is not a good first impression, Carlos Perez and Jake Marisnick and Jake Berger, first baseman. They have some work to do. Now, the good news is there's many weeks left to go in spring training to improve, but with Pedro Grifol setting the tone for this spring training, we're going to work on fundamentals, Jim. We're going to do the little things. We're going to try to practice as close to game speed as possible. After 2 games, you got more errors than runs scored. That's not good.
Well, I think he said that he wanted to see mistakes.
Well, you got him.
I think the White Sox took him too literally. Like, not in that way, just in terms of like, he's not going to, my interpretation of that comment, because he made that before the first game. So it wasn't a case where they made mistakes and then he tried to spin it in a positive way. This was a case where he was trying to be, these first games, explaining what he was going to see. And he just he welcomed basically any outcome because he can learn from any outcome. And if there are mistakes, then it's easier to go over things that might feel rote and unnecessary for professionals. And sure enough, I can imagine, and I think I saw footage of, basically throwing pop-ups behind home plate. I think they were more for the catcher, like the catcher just working on discarding his mask and following balls behind the plate. But really, I think they need to work on the whole who's got it when it comes to third, first, and where the pitcher should be. Like, the pitcher should be like checking with the rosin bag, apparently, because I've never understood that, like why pitchers can't call off infielders for plays in front of the mound, because they're already there. They don't have to negotiate the mound like going backwards. So I've never really understood why they're not to be trusted on those plays. Like, if they have to try to navigate the wind when they haven't come to a game, it's one thing. But like on those flares right in front of the mound where like the corner infielders might not get there, I don't understand why they can't call for it themselves. It's one of those things where, conventional wisdom, I guess, but if pitchers aren't going to be able to make the play, then they just have to scram.
The good news, Gavin Sheets at the first home run of spring training, and he had some good at-bats in the first game. Jake Berger has a home run already in spring training. Oscar Colas picked up a couple of hits in game 2 during his spring training
Yohan
career.
Makata, couple walks.
Yeah, Yohan Makata had a couple of walks, demonstrated a good batter's eye, something to pay attention to. Again, I want to see how Makata fares when pitches are in the strike zone, but he's already demonstrating a good batter's eye at the beginning of spring training. There is some good news. It's not all doom and gloom after the first 2 games for the White Sox, but they focus so much on the fundamentals, and already you got a blooper reel cooking for spring training. Let's limit that. Okay, it's one thing that the AA guys are making some mistakes. They're nervous. There's some pressure on them. They want to make a good impression on the coaching staff, so they're thought of if there's any injuries later in the season and they play well down in the minor leagues. But let's for the guys that are right now in quadruple A type of level, that are competing for spots of the 26-man roster, let's elevate our defensive play. Let's do that at least. If you're not going to hit, at least play better defense. That's really all I ask. And the White Sox have a full slate of spring training games coming up, and I think we're going to see more of the starters this week as the guys that are going to be participating in the World Baseball Classic, Jim, will be leaving on Thursday. I know that Yohan Makata and Luis Robert Jr. will be leaving the White Sox on Thursday, and then shortly after, you're going to have everybody else that will need to join their teams for the World Baseball Classic. So fingers crossed that the starters, if we get like a full starter slate, that defensively, at the very least, they look a lot better than what we've seen from the past 2 games.
Yeah, it's a case where, like, Brian Ramos, trying to call off guys who are his senior, those things happen. Oscar Colas, you can add him to the mistake list because he played a double into a triple, but I can understand, like, he thought the ball was going to probably cling off the angled sidewall and go back into shallow right field. So he was hesitant to overcommit to the corner, but David Dahl was running hard and took an extra base on him. So there are some mistakes that are young player mistakes, rookie mistakes, Oscar Colas first big league camp type mistakes. But yeah, hopefully, with these guys being absent, they'll get more reps. And then by the time they come back from the World Baseball Classic, you have hopefully an oiled machine, not even well oiled, just I would take oiled.
Yeah, there's kind of a level of expectation so far, and it's just not from the White Sox training camp, but across all training camps of Major League Baseball. Managers are expecting the players participating in the World Baseball Classic to be ready for opening day. You're going to be playing incredibly competitive games. A lot's riding on the line, especially for your respective countries. So more pressure situations that you're facing in spring training. Thus, after you experience that, you should be more prepared than you would be participating in like split squad type of games. We'll see if that actually holds true, but a lot of these youngsters are going to get more playing time during spring training, and again, hopefully defensively they do pick it up a little bit. I know that will be a focal point for Pedro Grifol and the coaching staff after the first couple of days. It is funny that you bring that up, that Pedro Grifol wanted mistakes to be made during spring training so they could address them, coach through them, and improve so they don't see these types of mistakes in the regular season. And maybe instead of the tennis racket or the tennis ball to flip the mask off and catch it behind home plate, they just need to work on catching them in front of home plate.
Exactly. Get more guys involved. I think, when one person has a task, they can probably do it. When it's 3 people trying to decide who should do it, mistakes are made.
Yes. Communication. Someone's got to call for it. But Jim and I are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to start our 2023 position previews, and we'll be previewing the Chicago White Sox outfield next on the Sox Machine Podcast. Welcome back to the Sox Machine Podcast. All right, it's time to kick off our 2023 position previews, and we're going to be starting with the Chicago White Sox outfield. And we talked about this a lot in 2022 in just some of the outfield configurations due to injury that we saw, especially late in the season. If you recall, there were some games where we saw Andrew Vaughn in left field, A.J. Pollock in center field, and Gavin Sheets in right field. Not exactly a great defensive alignment by any stretch of the imagination. And hopefully for the White Sox, they will not have to run into that situation again going to the 2023 season. They signed Andrew Benintendi to the largest contract in franchise history for the White Sox. And Luis Robert, hopefully he has a goal of playing in more games this year and putting together his first complete season since his shortened 2020 rookie campaign. Oscar Colas is around. Eloy Jimenez may get some playing time in the outfield, and we'll take a look at the other depth pieces as well. So let's start with the new guy, Jim. We'll start in left field and move over to center field and right field for those that are following along, listening on the podcast. And let's start with Andrew Benintendi. So for Andrew Benintendi going into the 2023 season, Zips is projecting 137 games, 14 home runs, 70 RBIs. Depth charts on Fangraphs, very similar numbers. When you're looking at the slash line and you're looking at the WAR, this is a potential for the White Sox adding a 2.5 WAR to 3 WAR type of outfielder to the roster. And when it comes to Benintendi, again, even though it sounds a little silly, especially now knowing that Manny Machado has signed a new contract with the San Diego Padres and bringing that, opening up that wound again for White Sox fans. But with Benintendi setting the largest free agent signing in franchise history, can Benintendi live up to the hype in 2023?
Yeah, I'm amazed by how little hype there is to the signing. Like when it happened, it was big news, but now like when it comes to the first day of spring training, like the biggest free agent signing in franchise history doesn't seem like much of a story, the way that like Bryce Harper at, Phillies camp or Machado at Padres camp in those years, like he's just kind of another guy, like a well-paid guy, but it's still all about Robert and Jimenez and Anderson, and Benintendi is just more or less a good player. And when you look at those projections, 14 homers, 70 RBIs, 274 batting average, 420 slugging, 3 wins. To me, it looks like Melky Cabrera with defense. Like that's kind of what you're looking at. Is Melky Cabrera put up those numbers? Like you think he topped out at 15 homers? Like he was more likely to hit 300 than Benintendi, but otherwise, like Benintendi had a little more patience, power about the same. Melky just really wasn't an outfielder, especially like after age 26 or so. Like he kind of filled out, you could say, and lost his range, but. Like Benintendi, me, like that's kind of what I'm thinking is like Melky Cabrera, who can do more than make catches on the warning track, which is really Cabrera's only strength. And he had a decent arm as well, but even if like Benintendi's not a Gold Glover and he's won in the past, like should be fine. So like I think the expectations are appropriate. It's just that the tag of largest free agent contract in franchise history is really just I think everybody recognizes for what it is, because like the White Sox were going to offer the same contract to Torrey Hunter in 2007. And, you look at it, 15 years later, basically, because that was the offseason of 2007, 2008. And, that's the same contract.
Yeah, and again, as a reminder, in 2022, Andrew Benintendi hit 304 with a 373 on base percentage and slugged 399 with just 5 home runs and 51 RBIs. And Benintendi spoke to that with the dead ball and playing at Kauffman Stadium, he adjusted the way that he attacked pitchers. He was looking to be more line drives, more batting average centric, getting singles and doubles. He knew he just did not have the pop to be able to hit many home runs at Kauffman Stadium, and he was hoping when he got traded to the Yankees, he could take advantage of the short porch at Yankee Stadium, but alas, he got hurt early in September, and he missed the rest of the season, and now here he is at Chicago, and when he signed with the White Sox, he knew very well just how hitter-friendly, especially for lefties, guaranteed rate field could be. So when it comes to the one thing that Andrew Benintendi needs to improve upon in 2023, is it as simple as taking advantage of guarantee rate field and pulling the ball in the air? Or is there something else that you're going to be paying attention to, Jim, from Andrew Benintendi?
No, I think that's largely it. You nailed it. Just White Sox have needed left-handed power to take advantage of that jet stream going out to the Miller Lite landing. I always want to call it the Goose Island because that was way better.
Yeah.
So just, we've watched so many hitters do that. We saw Gavin Sheets take special advantage of that with his heavy home road splits. So it's there, and as Sheets has, shown, you don't need like to crush the ball out that way. Like you can just sneak a lot of homers into the craft cave, basically. So, no, that's pretty much it. The ability to tailor his swing, tweak the batted ball results to be more oriented towards pulling the ball, because just the power alleys at guaranteed rate field and everything besides the right field corner, like the very most corner of right field at guaranteed rate field, is a lot more forgiving for a hitter with okay power, but not necessarily 20-25 homers type stuff.
And I mentioned the ZiPS projections and the depth chart projections as well for Fangraphs have Benintendi at 14 home runs. Is that enough for this White Sox lineup for Benintendi to settle at 14? I think he's got the potential to hit more than 14 home runs, but let's say the ZiPS and depth charts projections are correct, Jim, and it's just 14 home runs for Benintendi in 2023. Is that enough for the White Sox?
I think it can be. I think that brings the rest of his production into play. And if he took his, Kauffman Stadium, his Royals output, basically 300-ish hitter, and gave him 14 homers instead of 5, I think it would be enough. But if you're looking at a guy who's going to hit 250, and he's that's going to be the case where the slugging percentage is going to struggle to get over 400 that way, then that's not enough. So I think it's if you're talking 14 homers plus the well-rounded hitting approach, singles, doubles, walks, to get on base, especially if he's hitting second in front of the heart of the order, that should be fine. Not great, but fine. And that kind of goes along with his contract being, not great, but fine.
I mean, if he hit 305 and he provided 14 home runs, batting second behind Tim Anderson, and plays more than 140 games, I mean, we're talking about a 3.5 WAR left fielder for the White Sox. Like, that in itself would be a pretty big shot in the arm for the overall talent level for the Chicago White Sox compared to what we've seen the last couple of years in left field.
Yeah. And if he gets to like 20, 25 homers, then, the shape of his game is such that the rest of the numbers can take a little bit of a hit, and he'll be okay. So really there's about finding a balance. And if he wants to hit 20, 25 homers and bat 300, so much the better. But, trying to keep expectations in check here, because a lot of this, given that he played in Fenway Park, which does not really reward left-handed hitters who pull the ball, especially like the further away you get from the pesky pole. And then you go to Kauffman Stadium, which has deep alleys as well. Like, it's just a case where like he hasn't been able to, pull the ball in the air that to the extent that he can be rewarded. So he has shown the ability to adjust his results based on where he's playing, but I would rather have him, base my expectations on what he's shown, adjust a little bit for the environment. But otherwise, like, if he hits 20, 25, because of the, heavy home splits, like, great. But that seems unreasonable, especially given just the White Sox issues keeping guys on the field. You have the health issues too, to where 140 games would be fine. Anything beyond that, great. I would say anything below 15 homers, give or take a couple, would be disappointing. If you can't get double digits, that's not what they needed. But 15 sounds okay. Like, Melky Cabrera with defense.
So let's play the over-under game for each of the outfielders, and we'll do this for all the players for the upcoming 2023 season. For Andrew Benintendi, I'm setting it at 3 WAR. Are you taking the over on 3 WAR for Benintendi, under, or I'm going to allow you to push here and say, Josh, you hit the number right on the head. He's going to finish at 3 WAR for 2023. How are you feeling for Benintendi at 3 WAR?
Is it a universal over under, or can it be like, can he crack 3 in one, like Baseball Reference or Fangraphs?
Let's use Fangraphs for this. We'll use Fangraphs WAR for this.
Okay. Well, I would just say I'm going to say over, just because we're picking one. Like, I would say, like, if he had to, like, go across the board, be a 3-win player, I would say no, just because I think some of his valuation will be based on defense, and I can see just, an unimpressive metric bringing his value down because he's just not killing it on the offensive side of the ball. But if we're going to take one, I think he can, just because I think, I'm going to trust his ability to take some advantage of guaranteed right field. And I think he's closer to like 3.5, 4, early on, given a full workload. The question to me is just whether that was enough, whether the White Sox did enough to, whether they needed a difference maker. I don't think he's a difference maker, unless other guys play well. Whereas I was hoping at some point over the last couple of years, the White Sox would have added somebody who could make it so that Luis Roberts, Eloy Jimenez, and Tim Anderson wouldn't all have to hit in order for the White Sox to reach 90 wins. So that's kind of where I'm thinking is like, I think he can do okay for himself. It just, will it be enough to lift, cover for other positions? I'm skeptical in that regard. Oh, did you have an over under on that?
Oh, yes. I should probably make a guess. You know what? I'll be confident here. I'm going to say over. We've both been on the Andrew Benintendi train since the signing, and he was actually the big free agent signing when we did the free agent guesses for the White Sox that I had. So I will say over. I like 3.5 WAR for Benintendi this year. And 3 WAR seems to be like the difference maker, like the threshold between teams that make it to the postseason and teams that don't. Like, you want to have like 6 to 9 position players be 3 WAR or better. And obviously there's a huge range, right? Like the Yankees, like Aaron Judge is 10 WAR. Gleyber Torres is 3 WAR. That's a gigantic difference in overall production. but it's all about the depth of quality that teams have. And you take a look at the Houston Astros in 2022, not just even 3 WAR, but the amount of players that they had above 2 WAR for the position player side was really crazy. They were just getting excellent value up and down their entire lineup. So I think Andrew Benintendi could be a 3.5 WAR left fielder for the White Sox. And again, I think that's a big shot in the arm for the overall talent level for this ball club. So I'm going to definitely take the over on 3 WAR for Andrew Benintendi. And for those playing along, you can also play along in the comments section at Sox Machine, or hit us up on Twitter at Sox Machine, or you can hit me up at Twitter at Sox Machine_Josh. All right, so let's move over to center field. You made mention of Luis Robert. It is Luis Robert Jr. now, as he's added the junior to the uniform. So I'll try to do my best, everyone, to call him Luis Robert Jr., the best of my abilities. If not, we can do the tip jar again.
Well, I think in this case, like Cal Ripken Jr., like on secondary reference, like people called him Ripken. It wasn't always Ripken Jr.
Okay.
So like, I think it's a case where, yeah, first reference, but then I think the junior, like even like Griffey Jr., that kind of falls away upon second reference, saying it over and over again. So I think we can give ourselves some forgiveness there. But yeah, when it comes to at least first reference,
all right,
the junior's there.
So for Luis Robert last year in 2022, 284 batting average. That's pretty good. 319 on base percentage. We know he's not big into walks. A 426 slugging percentage. We know about the injuries, the various injuries that he had in 2022. Just 12 home runs and 56 RBIs because of the amount of games that he's missed. And he was a 2.1 WAR player for the White Sox and didn't even play 100 games. Luis Robert is now entering his 4th season in the major leagues, and he's never played more than 100 games in a season. And that is something that I noticed in the spring training stories, Jim, for Luis Robert coming into camp, that he is aware of that. He's had good seasons for the White Sox, but they're just good. And he knows that he can do better. And I love that type of mindset, because I think everyone associated with the White Sox, all White Sox fans and media, know just how special of a talent Luis Robert is. And when you look at the depth chart projections for 2023 on Fangraphs, I mean, this slash line's very healthy. 277, a 323 on base percentage, slugging 466, 24 home runs, 87 RBIs if he plays 136 games with a 4.2 WAR. I don't think you'll find any argument from White Sox fans that if Luis Robert can play more than 135 games, yes, he could hit all of these projections on Fangraphs depth charts. But the main storyline is, can he do it? Can he put together a full season? Where is your confidence level right now in Luis Robert putting together his first official full 162 game season?
I'm going to say it's kind of low, unfortunately. Like I'm looking at his injury log, and it's just so, it's a mix of like recurring injuries or kind of weak points in his ability to stay on the field. And then some weird stuff too, like the hand and wrist injuries come up again and again. Like when you look at his minor league profile, his major league profile, especially at the end of the season, letting go of the bat with the wrong hand. And, I don't think, the Tony La Russa administration did so many players, wrong, or at least like so few favors to players when it came to just like, Tim Anderson playing with a groin issue and looking like Alcides Escobar, Larry Garcia collapsing in the batter's box because of like his legs and back, Luis Robert letting go with the wrong, like it just, what were they, I have no idea what they were doing. And that's, I think, one of the issues with like the fan satisfaction or dissatisfaction we talked about before, just with like, there was never a thorough accounting for everything that went wrong and why it went wrong. So like until, either the White Sox have to explain in sufficient detail why their injury reporting was so messed up, or they just need to actually play a full healthy season. So I think like that's the reason why like I'm a little bit down when it comes to the injury cases across the board, like the guys who have trouble staying in the field. Like, I guess I need them to show me, like, here's a case where Rick Hahn saying, trust is earned in the field. And when it comes to staying on the field, it absolutely is. So, but yeah, you have the hand issues, wrist issues, illnesses, COVID. He had the vertigo thing. He had groin and hip issues. Like, it's kind of all over the place. So yeah, I don't really trust him to stay healthy. And that's why, like, when he talked about like big additions, like I was big into Brandon Nimmo because he could cover center. You maybe don't want him there all the time, but if he had to slide him there, you could rotate him in and out the way like you can't do with Benintendi. And that's why I thought like you just need somebody who can stand in center with some confidence if Robert's out. I don't know if they did that. Oscar Colas theoretically played there, but if Colas is struggling to stay in right field or just struggling to hang in the majors, like do you really want to add center field to his list? Do you want to have a center right field gap of Oscar Colas and Eloy Jimenez playing their weaker positions? Like, that's when it gets messy. So yeah, that's, I think, what I consider to maybe be the weak point in this roster.
Yeah. When we talk about back-breaking injuries for the White Sox, I feel like Luis Robert is a back-breaking injury. If he has another serious injury where he misses a month, or God forbid, more than a month of the season, the White Sox just don't have the depth at center field to come anywhere close to the type of production that Luis Robert can provide. And it's just not coming close to his production level. It's sweating for every fly ball that's hit into center field. Like, maybe you feel confident about Billy Hamilton to patrol center field, but Billy Hamilton's going to provide nothing offensively. And that's just the way it's been for his entire major league career. Maybe he has a renaissance in 2023, and that would be a nice surprise. And you could take advantage of his speed. And we talked about Jake Marisnick. He's already struggling in spring training in center field. Nobody wants to see Luis Garcia out in center field. I don't think Andrew Benintendi would be a good center fielder for the White Sox, especially when it comes to arm strength. The options are incredibly limited at center field for the White Sox. So I definitely think that Luis Robert is one of those back-breaking injuries. So when we talk about things that he has to improve upon in 2023, I think it really is all about health for Luis Robert. Like, you need to figure out in your fourth year in the major leagues how to stay on the field. He did a pretty good job of that in 2020, his rookie year. He played 55 of the 60 games. But that's just a 60-game season. This is a 162-game marathon. We're dangerously getting to the point that if you can't do it in your fourth year, will you ever be able to do it? And that's not a question I really want to answer.
Yeah.
Flash forwarding a year from now, Jim, I would love if Luis Robert played 140 games, put it all together for his first healthy season. That would make me feel a lot better about someone that I'm very high about on the Chicago White Sox roster. If he can't do it again, then I'm going to get like the Sunday scaries when it comes to Luis Robert and his future with the Chicago White Sox.
Yeah, you get like a little bit of like the Byron Buxton, now Grady Sizemore before, like in terms of like, just never could stay on the field. Like, just everybody, like baseball fans are disappointed because like that was a fun guy to watch. And maybe you didn't like watching Grady Sizemore at his best playing the White Sox, and same thing with Byron Buxton, but just, baseball fans want to see a talent like that come together, and it's always a shame when it doesn't. But yeah, like all the quibbles we have about Robert, like settling for right field too much, being a little bit too aggressive. His range number or like his outfield numbers are pretty poor last year in center field. And I think part of that was vertigo. Part of that was the hip issues as well. Like, kind of the year before hampering his like burst and his conviction on routes. So like, the Gold Glove form hasn't been there either, but it all comes back to health and just like whether it's having his body in shape and not having any restrictions on it to go full speed after fly balls in the gap and not, round balls off to prevent them from getting, into the alley and giving up a single when you could have, giving up a single when you're afraid of a double versus like, robbing that single because you have that kind of that closing speed to make a play. And like when it comes to figuring out how pitchers are attacking him, like it's been hard for him to stay on the field with his body cooperating to make those proper adjustments the way we've seen him make it at times and be a force. So yeah, everything comes back to health with him.
Moving to our over-under, again, all about health. I set the number at 104.5 games for Luis Robert. So he can't play half a game. That's not how this works. So now you have to pick over or under, Jim. So how are you feeling about 104.5 games for Luis Robert? Are you taking the over or under?
I'm going to say the under just because I don't want to be hurt again. It's like I'm not convinced on that, but just like if at the end of the year he plays 80 games, like you'd say, of course he did. Whereas like if he played 130, so like, all right, that's progress. And so like, I'm just going with the, what he's shown and hoping that Pedro Grifol and better communication and Jeff Head being added to the training staff, even if, the Reds injury numbers are pretty awful themselves last year. Just, there's a different process for navigating injuries and managing them when players are not close to 100%, but also like on the verge of being playable.
I will be optimistic and say he does it. That this could be a pretty special year for Luis Robert. Listen, if the White Sox are to win the American League Central, they need Luis Robert to play 140 games. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say he finally figures it out. That this is the year that he does stay on the field and he lives up to all of our dreams and expectations we've had ever since he signed with the White Sox out of Cuba. So I will be optimistic here, and I will take the over for Luis Robert at 104.5 games. I'll say he plays 140 games, and fingers crossed that those 22 games that he doesn't play, with my optimism, doesn't turn into a hellscape in center field. Like, it'd be great if he could play more than 150 games, and I'm sure he would love to play every single day because, again, the White Sox, this is an area that they're lacking right now is quality center field depth behind Luis Robert. We'll get into that point in a moment, but we've done left field, we've done center field. Let's shift over to right field. And for Sox Machine here, I think it's fair to say we are projecting that Oscar Colas will be the primary right fielder for the Chicago White Sox. Now, when I say that, what I mean, listeners, is that I believe that he'll have the most projected starts in right field for the Chicago White Sox. Will he be the opening day right fielder for the White Sox? Time will tell. But I think, Jim, it's fair to say that we both agree he will have the most starts projection-wise in right field for the White Sox.
I think it's fair to say, just a matter of whether that's 130 games or 100 games or even 60. Like 60 games could win the right field spot, the coveted right field spot on the Baseball Reference team page after the season. Like, whenever you see those weird numbers, like the DH was Larry Garcia. It's like, yeah, because 7 other guys got hurt. I guess it is Larry. So I can see that being the same thing with Colas here. And here's hoping it's going to be with him. Like if he plays 130 games, that means he's playing well. Like his talent will dictate the games played, I think, more than anybody else on this roster, just because like the White Sox have to be prepared to, mitigate his weaknesses, whether it's like, having a right-handed outfielder to complement him or having like, Jimenez out there, more frequently with Gavin Sheets being a backup DH. Like there are ways to manage him and hide him against tougher pitchers. And so like if he's playing 130, 140 games, that has to mean it's going pretty well.
A reminder, last year, Oscar Colas had a really impressive minor league stint across 3 levels, but primarily in AA and AAA in 2022, where for the season across those levels, Oscar Colas hit .314 with a .371 on base percentage, slugged .524. He had 23 home runs in the minors last year with 79 RBIs. For his 2023 projections, using the Depth Charts Fangraphs projections, Depth Charts is projected a .246 hitter, a 294 on base percentage, slugging .416 with 18 homers and 62 RBIs with a 0.8 WAR. If you use Zips is thinking 21 home runs, 77 RBI, so that's quite the difference from depth charts. A 691 OPS, so still not great, and a 1.2 WAR from Zips going into 2023. And I think the big storyline, and we've talked about the confidence level, we've talked about this a couple times during the offseason. Now we're here in spring training and we're previewing, is Oscar Colas ready to take over right field for the White Sox, not just in the short term, but the long term? How are you feeling right now, Jim, about long-term Oscar Colas being the White Sox answer in right field?
I feel okay about him in the long term. It's just that the short term is so important. Like, this is such a high leverage year for all of these question marks. Robert's health, Benintendi being able to click immediately with the White Sox, Eloy Jimenez, we'll get to him, but just like all these questions, like, have to be answered in the affirmative, or at least most of these questions have to be answered in the affirmative, basically as quickly as possible, just to, cover up for the weak depth elsewhere, whether it's, starting pitching rotation or Liam Hendricks being out or infield being a little bit of a mystery between, Anderson's health and Moncada's just general well-being. So like, it's a case where, the short term is just like, it's a, magic 8-ball situation to me, like ask again later, just because for the short term to figure out like what kind of instant impact he can have in April and May, like I think watching him in spring training is going to be a weeks long project. Just to understand, like, he's going to have terrible at bats. Like, he's going to have awful looking at bats. Just a question of like, can he isolate them to a day at a time? Maybe he has like an ugly 0 for 4, 3 strikeouts, only sees, 11 pitches. Like, that could very well be games like that. Just more of a matter of like, can he brush it off? Can he correct himself fast enough to be under control sooner rather than later? That's a question I'm monitoring right now. I don't really have an answer or a sense that isn't just like a random guess that I could have to correct myself on later and feel kind of foolish about.
What would give me instant confidence is that if Oscar Colas can display good discipline within the strike zone and he draws walks early at, let's say, a 7 or 8% rate, which is not crazy high. And the reason that would give me instant confidence is, one, he's recognizing the pitches early from major leaguers, and that will help him survive at least the first month. Some rookies thrive in the first month because pitchers don't have a great book on them. They challenge these rookies, and suddenly they hit like 8 home runs or 10 home runs in their first month. Like Jose Abreu, when he won Rookie of the Year, he had 10 home runs in the month of April for the Chicago White Sox and finished with more than 30 just because pitchers didn't know how to attack Jose Abreu early, and he made them pay because everybody thought, oh, this guy can't hit a fastball, and voila, Jose Abreu could hit a fastball his rookie year. And I think the league in itself is just smarter now. So they are throwing more breaking pitches. If Colas can recognize that, lay off those breaking pitches, and he's got an on-base percentage higher than .320, that will give me instant confidence because these computer models, Jim, Zips, depth charts, they're not seeing a hitter in his rookie year having an on-base percentage above .300. And that's going to lead to some struggles. That's going to lead to some, not just ugly games, some ugly weeks during the season. And that is to be expected. He is a rookie. This is a jump. But for the White Sox, they are confident that they can win the American League Central. Internally, they're confident that they could still challenge to win the American League pennant and make it to the World Series. I don't share that same confidence with them. But if they're going to make that, if they're going to hit their internal goals, they really need Oscar Colas to hit the ground running. And I think a good way to look at it early on is the on-base percentage. If Colas is drawing walks early, to go with his ability to survive and maybe get some singles and doubles and home run power comes later in the season, then I think that he's adjusted well to the league, and then he can make another adjustment and start hitting for power.
Yeah, I think in his rookie year, I would take a 300 OBP with power, like just And I say 300 OBP because like we don't know how the ball's going to play.
True.
Like we don't. Like, that's what's so tough about like talking about these numbers like in isolation is we like it could be a case where like the ball is dead again in 300 with like an ISO closer to 200 than 100 like plays really well in this environment, especially like if he's elevating the ball enough when he makes contact. So just isolating his production to one number, I think is a little bit fraught when it comes to trying to figure it out. But like, I would take 300. I would take like a 5-6% walk rate just because like we have seen some wild swings early. I can see some really over anxious plate appearances early, the kind of 3-pitch strikeouts be like, oh, what was that all about? So that's why I think like, it's going to be really tough to watch him at times. And it's going to be a big picture type project, getting him through the season, just because the White Sox have really no credible backup. Like that's one thing that kind of drives me nuts about this outfield discussion is like Benintendi's fine. It's just Benintendi didn't change the bigger outfield questions of what happens in center, what happens in right, which are bigger than what happens in left because like we've seen the White Sox fake left field okay in previous years, even if Andrew Vaughn couldn't quite do it himself.
The over-under for Oscar Colas, I've set it at 20.5 home runs hit for Oscar Colas in his rookie year. Are you taking the over or under 20.5 home runs, Jim?
I'm taking the under, but I had to think about it a while. I think if he hit like say 23, 24 homers, I would be pleasantly surprised. I don't think he can't do it. Just more a matter of like, oh, that'd be a good season. And, I don't want, should he come up short of that, and I'm thinking like kind of 16, 17, especially if they have to manage his playing time, if they have to send him down, it's more a matter of just like, can he hit the game's plate mark? And I have questions that he will one way or another, just because they have other guys who can step in and take some of the playing time if need be. It's not going to be great watching them, but they can. Like if Luis Robert's healthy, you might be able to get by with some Eloy Jimenez. You might be able to get by with a little bit of Gavin Sheets. Like, there are some guys who can fill in those plate appearances if Colas like looks vulnerable routinely against, major league pitchers or good lefties, what have you. So I think I would take 15 from him with decent numbers elsewhere across the board. And, clearly the best right field defense of the bunch, allowing for the rookie mistake here and there. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
The number that I have in my head is 23 home runs from Oscar Colas. Do I have a good scientific backing for my prediction of 23 home runs for Oscar Colas? Mm-hmm. No, but that's what I envision Oscar Colas this upcoming year. So I will take the over. So far I'm 3 overs right now on the outfield. So you can't say that I'm negative. I'm pretty optimistic right now when it comes to the White Sox outfielder. So let's talk about the other option.
Well, with Colas there real quick, like I can understand like 23 just because the conversation we're having about Andrew Benintendi, it's kind of the same thing. Like what about Benintendi, but with power? And Colas has plus power. So I mean like the same conversations we're having about a guy who we're hoping can hit 15 to 20 apply to a guy who has 20 homer power if he can get the barrel in the right place often enough on the right pitches, which is really the bigger concern. So I get the optimism. I just, for me, it's more a matter of like the White Sox shouldn't have put him in a place where they need him to hit 20, 25 homers because like he's a rookie and he's had a very unusual professional background given, going to Japan and then having the absence of the pandemic and then transferring over to the United States, defecting, that he's had a lot on his plate. And so if it took him a year to have some serious lumps, but then he gets around to fixing it, that'd be perfectly fine individually. It just happens to come at a terrible time for the team.
So let's talk about the other option in right field for the Chicago White Sox. Whether you like it or not, White Sox fans, Eloy Jimenez. And Eloy last year, when he did play for the White Sox, offensively, very strong. Maybe the best season that he's put together when you look at slash line and you look at weighted runs created plus on Fangraphs. Eloy Jimenez was a .295 hitter last year, a .358 on base percentage, and he slugged .500 with 16 home runs and 54 RBIs. He was worth 1.7 wins above replacement. When you look at his 2023 projections, so on one side of the coin, you've got Zips. And Zips thinks that Eloy is going to be an 808 OPS hitter. That's pretty good. But just 23 home runs and 71 RBIs in 110 games. Then you have Fangraph's depth charts, which I have displayed for those that are watching at youtube.com/SoxMachine. And depth charts is thinking Eloy's going to be a 270 hitter with a 325 on base percentage, slugging 487, with 31 home runs and 96 RBIs and a 2.6 WAR player. Now, obviously, White Sox fans would prefer the depth charts projection for Eloy Jimenez, and that might coincide with the thinking of what Eloy can do, especially since we saw him hit 30-plus home runs his rookie year with the Chicago White Sox and getting back to that type of mode. And I think that Eloy could go back and be a 30-home run hitter. Mm-hmm. The White Sox really need him to be. This isn't we would want him to be. No, sorry, Eloy. You have to be the 30 home run guy because you're the one that's got the most home run power in this lineup. So the main storyline for Eloy Jimenez coming to 2023, Jim, is this the year? We just had this conversation with Luis Robert. Mm-hmm. But is this the year that Eloy Jimenez becomes the hitter we all thought he could be when the White Sox acquired him from the Chicago Cubs in a trade?
Yeah, it's funny, the Fangraphs numbers or the Zips and then the depth chart numbers. Like basically like the Zips is something happened to him and the depth chart is nothing happened to him. Like those are the expectations. And like you do have to bake in that something could happen to Jimenez. And here's a case where like I have a little bit more optimism about him staying on the field than Robert just because, and this could be just a little bit arbitrary and sure. This is me just kind of going off gut feeling here because health is the hardest thing to project, but just, he's had weird injuries. He doesn't have like the chronic injury, that Luis Robert has, like the hand wrist thing, the sliding thing. Like I appreciate that he's lost the weight, that he's coming looking trimmer, like he's taking the outfield thing seriously, and he's taking like the Rick Hahn's comments that like he produced a DH, he should be fine there, like taking it personally, and he should because like he's not slow, he's not fast, but he's not slow. Like his foot speed, his top speed is like fine, especially like when his legs are fully healthy, and he's made some tough catches. It's just a matter of like the reads are often questionable, and his faith in those reads forces him to have slower breaks or more cautious lines, and that allows balls to fall where maybe they shouldn't. So like it is a kind of a case where like he has created these expectations by being like the class clown in the outfield, and like the bobblehead with Luis Robert calling him off on balls in his jurisdiction, and like Eloy can't be trusted in left field. Like he's played into that. So I do find it refreshing that he realizes like, oh, that may have not been a good career move early on to like indulge those things. Like you can be like, I think a funny guy, and like he's I would call him like a gifted face actor. Like he's very expressive and can communicate to the camera without saying a word, and that's fun to see, and it's good to have those guys in the dugout. But I think when it comes to like outfield play, like it's one thing when like Adrian Beltre and Elvis Andrus do it because both of them are Gold Glove defenders at their peak, or they were when they were at Texas. And it's like, oh, they're bickering over, they're messing around with each other because they're so good that they can do it. With Robert and Jimenez, it was like, oh, Robert's messing around with Jimenez, or Jimenez is messing around because he can't do the job, and Robert has to clean up the mess for him. And like, yeah, like it's something that maybe was okay when they were winning, but when things took a turn, it's one of those things you can add to the pile and say like, this is one of the things wrong with the White Sox. Jimenez is wrong with the White Sox. He might not be a bad fit in the roster. The Sox Machine podcast thinks they should trade him for Brian Reynolds, etc. And so I'm appreciating him like making those outward efforts with his comments, with the shape that he's in, to take the right field challenge seriously. And I think Pedro Grifol is handling it well so far, saying like, I may have to tell him something he doesn't want to hear, but I'm giving him an opportunity to change my mind. And I think that's kind of where you have to be, especially if Colas needs a caddy. So I like how he's come into spring training, and I'm hoping that translates to 140 plus games, because like the form he showed after coming back was fine. And I think, watching that bouncer go through the infield in the first game of Cactus League play, and I wrote about it at Sox Machine, comparing it to a similar grounder he hit last year. Like, he's a guy who his exit velocity is strong enough to where like the shift or the absence of it, absence of three infielders on the left side of the infield could benefit him uniquely to where we're talking about like 5-10 extra hits a year, just because like his top spin hoppers get through if there isn't a third infielder there. So that's another reason why I'm strangely optimistic about him, when maybe, kind of some tendencies in his career have made me think that, I should temper them just as much as I do with Robert.
He's motivated. As you mentioned, Jim, Eloy Jimenez is very motivated coming to the spring training, that he wants to prove not just the outside critics, but also the internal critics that he can play in the outfield. And with him losing all that weight, especially around the waist, I mean, he does look slimmer. The one thing that I'm curious about is that if it's going to allow him to fire off his hips quicker, because we talked about this when the White Sox, in the podcast episode, the White Sox have a fastball problem. Eloy Jimenez was one of those hitters for the White Sox that really struggled against velocity, especially from right-handed pitchers in 2022, despite the great numbers that he put up. If you threw a fastball in the zone at 95 or greater, you could give Eloy Jimenez fits, because his swing is long, incredibly powerful, but it's not a very quick swing. With the weight loss, if he's able to fire off the hips quicker, if that generates more barrel speed through the zone, a lot has been written across Major League Baseball now. That's the new hitting fad, capturing barrel speed for hitters. The Dodgers are really focusing on barrel speed this year. That if those pitches don't give Eloy Jimenez fits, then yeah, he could have the monster season we've been dreaming about, where he's hitting more than 40 home runs, and maybe he can challenge Albert Bell's franchise record of 49 home runs just because of the absolute power that he has. But he's got to hit the ball in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Ball in air, Eloy. Your ground ball rate cannot start with the 5.
Yep.
Okay, as in 50% or better. I think he's got to cut his ground ball rate 7 to 10%. If he can do that, if he's like at 43% or lower, with just how successful his home run per fly ball rate is in his career, then yeah, he's easily going to hit more than 30 home runs. He's got to hit the ball in the air. And that's going to be something I'm going to be paying attention to. Is there something else that you're going to be paying attention to for Eloy Jimenez for this upcoming year?
No, I think, that's one of them, but it kind of going back to the Robert discussion, just health, him being able to stay on the field the full year, like understanding what, shortcomings or flaws of his as a hitter or as a defender are due to just mechanics, to his approach, understanding like how pitchers are attacking him and whether he can adjust, compensate with his swing to get the barrel where it needs to be, or is it a case where just like he's just not healthy enough to ultimately he's playing at 80% a lot of the time, and just he needs to be at like 90 to 100% in order for him to be like that monster hitter. So yeah, I just want to know like who the real Jimenez is health wise, and then allow him to have the weeks on, weeks off, just as pitchers are probably still learning them too. And so like they might see something new because of, maybe a swing tweak is made, stance tweak, the hips thing that you mentioned, like if those are functioning for him better, like maybe that opens up a new cold zone for him that he has to adjust to, because like he's attacking one way. And so, there might be something that opens up that he has to cover, but like, I just want to see him have those, have the ability and have his body cooperate to where he can, have the normal weeks of hot and cold, and ultimately adjusting to where you do have this above average, hitter who merits serious all-star consideration by the break.
So over under for Eloy Jimenez, I've set at 30.5 games played in the outfield for Eloy Jimenez in the 2023 season. Jim, are you taking over or under?
I'm going to say over, because there are so many ways it can happen. That's kind of the thing. Like when it comes to just like sheer ability, like sure, like you wouldn't want to see him necessarily out there for 30 games, but between Colas, between like if Benintendi gets hurt or has to miss some time, like there are just too many avenues for like a physically capable Jimenez to get that playing time, because like you don't want Gavin Sheets out there if you don't have to. You don't want Andrew Vaughn out there at all. So, what else do you have? So that's why I say over, and I think fairly comfortably.
Oh, wow. I'm going to say over slightly. I'm thinking like 10 games in left field, 25 games in right field. So 35 games in the outfield for Eloy Jimenez in 2023. And I think that's an okay amount. I mean, he's playing in the outfield, vast majority as a DH for these games for the White Sox, but he's getting an opportunity maybe once a week to go out there in the outfield. If it's more than that, either he's excelling in the outfield for the White Sox, or Andrew Benintendi has a serious injury.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be like, I'm thinking more like 50, 50 to 60. And I think part of it, like he might be looking a bit better. Also, like just Colas might need more help, especially early in the season to get through weeks. Cause you can have Gavin Sheets be left-handed power at the DH spots. You can have like, whether it's Colas, whether it's Jake Berger, if he's on the bench as a power bat, like you can have Sheets and Berger divvy up the DH time, and Jimenez would be the one providing the main cover in right field if he looks capable of standing in right field for a game at a time. Like there could be a lot of those games at a time early.
Before we wrap up the outfield preview, let's talk about the White Sox outfield depth. And I list 4 outfielders here. I've got Billy Hamilton, I got Victor Reyes, I got Gavin Sheets, and I got Jake Marisnick. For Gavin Sheets' season preview, I'm going to put him over at first base. So when we preview the infield corners, first base and third base together, we'll talk about Gavin Sheets' projections for the upcoming season, but he could be part of the outfield mix for the White Sox in 2023. But this is what I'm talking about when it comes to outfield depth, that you really do not want any of these guys that we talked about before having a severe injury, because Benintendi, Robert, Jimenez, we know that they can be really good hitters in the majors. We are very hopeful in Oscar Colas. These 4, I mean, Gavin Sheets hits well at home, but he does not hit well away from guarantee rate field. Jake Marisnick has never hit. Billy Hamilton hasn't hit for the second half of his career. He has trouble getting on base. And Victor Reyes was cut by Detroit. So out of these 4, who do you think could be part of the mix of maybe making a 26-man roster as like either the 4th or 5th outfielder for the White Sox if they have to pick one of these 4?
It feels like Marisnick is Adam Engel, who, we didn't have a history with. Like, Engel, we saw him progress. We saw him grow as a player. There were reasons to like him. And then like, it was unfortunate when his game fell apart, just because we saw him on the cusp of like being a good or average center fielder, which should be incredible given where he came from and how much work he had to do in the minor leagues to get there. And just, he had some opportunities to stick and he couldn't quite do it. And Marisnick, like same thing, right-handed, can play center, has some like Gold Glove type stretches of defense in his past, but now he's on the other side of 30 and just might be hanging on. But I kind of like him early just because you know what you're going to get. Not to ask too much from him. Billy Hamilton like feels like, to me, I don't want to, I kind of, I liked having him around 2021. I did not like seeing him come back in 2023 just because I liked him so much in 2021. And I don't want a reason to dislike him. Like it was so perfect. It was such a sweet time on his experience, what he provided. All the hits were a bonus, and some of the hits were awesome. Some of the plays in the field were awesome. Smile, an 80 smile, like great having him around, especially like, as one of the many pleasant surprises, fit right in. But as somebody like, I guess Hamilton has to go out there. Like, I feel like he's going to be played in those circumstances where like, oh yeah, he's playing again and he has to. Oh no. And that's kind of like why I didn't want to see him come back and kind of tarnish. It wouldn't tarnish 2021, but it'd just be like, I liked what I remember of Billy Hamilton. I don't really want to see a case where he has to try to prop up a team that is really struggling to fill innings in center field. That's where I'm getting a little nervous. One guy you didn't mention, and I'll bring up, is Romy Gonzalez, just because if he's anything like the White Sox have described him being in 2023, which I'm skeptical about. I don't know. I thought part of it was because they were just waiting for Elvis Andrus to be like, no, we can get you for cheaper. We can get you for cheaper. Romy Gonzalez really good. They're like, bam, Andrus is our second baseman. Ha ha. Yeah, we're just kidding all along. Enjoy Charlotte. But no, even after they signed him, they're still talking him up and saying Larry Garcia might be the one who has to earn his keep. So I'm still really intrigued by what Gonzalez is going to do. And if he's anything like a player Garcia used to be, in terms he's fine. 1 win bench player, maybe 2 wins, and fills in credibly at a bunch of positions. You don't want him starting for a week at a time in any position, but you don't mind seeing him out there. I think he could be out there in a corner spot. Center field, I think he would be stretched, but in a corner spot, sure. Those are the kind of 3 guys I have right now. And if they are able to get that Swiss Army knife back, whether it's Garcia or Gonzalez on the bench, I think it does open up a possibility for Hamilton to get in, just because he would be there for speed, defense, pinch running with larger bases. There might be a specific use for him, and he doesn't have to do all the hard work of holding down a lineup spot. But I think if they do need more help, right-handed help for Colas, I think Marisnik is probably the best fit, unless we're watching him and he completely looks washed.
I like Billy Hamilton more than Jake Marisnik when making a 26-man roster as your 26th guy. Very specialized role, pinch running late in games. I think it could scare, with the limits on throwing over to first base. It could mess with the minds of relievers late in games when you see Billy Hamilton on base, kind of like Gerard Dyson would for White Sox relievers back in the day.
Yeah.
Face of the Royals. So I could see that possibility. How likely it is, we'll have to see how the rest of spring training plays out. But I think really your 4 main outfielders are Benintendi, Robert, Colas, with Jimenez getting some time. And it's kind of weird to think of Eloy Jimenez as the guy who gets the 4th most outfield appearances. Technically, that would make him the 4th outfielder for the White Sox. And what we're now talking about is the 5th outfielder. But really, we're hoping that the 5th outfielder becomes the 4th outfielder as a defensive replacement late in games, not Eloy Jimenez, defensive replacement, unless he shocks the world and he suddenly becomes a really good defensive outfield. We feeling pretty good about this unit coming into the season, Jim?
Not really, but more just because of questions when it comes to just availability. That's really it. I mean, the talent itself, I like watching all these guys at their best. Or in Colas's case, when I've seen him, at his best in Birmingham, a lot to like there. There's a lot to like about all these guys. Just more a matter of, I really wish they had you brought in that, I would say, going back to Brandon Nemo, that guy who can cover for 2 spots instead of just hold down his own spot really well.
If they stay healthy, which is the phrase of 2023, I think this could be a 10 WAR plus outfield unit for the Chicago White Sox. Benintendi and Robert probably carry most of that load when it comes to wins above replacement. I think there's potential here that this could be a sneaky good outfield unit in the major leagues, especially offensively.
I'll give you that. Sneaky good is a good way to put it.
But they need to stay healthy.
Yes. And it gets ugly in a hurry. That's what keeps me from being enthusiastic is if Robert goes down, what do they do?
Yeah, I don't know what they do. We just talked through it, folks. Pray. I really don't know what you do if Luis Robert goes down early. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Punch a hole through the nearest wooden object that you have for luck that everyone stays healthy for the outfield unit for the upcoming 2023 season. But that is our 2023 season preview for the Chicago White Sox outfield. Love to hear your guys' feedback and thoughts about the outfield unit. Again, you can post your comments in the podcast page on SoxMachine.com or hit us up on Twitter at Sox Machine. You can follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe and listen to wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. We take the recorded, so we also upload them to our YouTube page at youtube.com/SoxMachine. Continue to subscribe, everyone. We got 1,040 subscribers now. And when we post new videos, like our playback highlights from our watch parties, make sure you subscribe so you get notified of all the new videos that we post on our YouTube channel. Again, you can subscribe at youtube.com/SoxMachine. If you enjoy our work and would like more, sign up to become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content. They get ad-free versions of both the podcast and website. When we have new Sox Machine swag, they're the first ones to receive it. Big shout out to Dan Stevens for joining our Veterans Committee. Dan, thank you so much for doing that. We still have 7 spots available of the Veterans Committee. So if you are interested to be part of the Sox Machine Inner Circle, you can reach out to Jim and I.
Yeah, we're getting great correspondence too. Like a few of our members are down there at Camelback Ranch at, in the Greater Cactus League overall, providing, firsthand observations, photos, learned that Jake Berger's homer, I guess, drilled a kid, just, which is, unfortunate, but just like, that's how I found out, was through our group chat going on. So a lot of valuable information and vibe checks at Camelback Ranch and elsewhere. So I'm loving what I'm seeing so far from the VC when it comes to our chat going on.
Yep, absolutely. And again, we have monthly plans also starting at $2. You can save with an annual subscription. You can sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.